key that the two parties have to come together and have a common understanding and goal and assist each other going forward.
Finally, I want to ask you the road ahead. Do you see the project rollout as the key, or do we need more policy changes going forward?
Look, I think you need both. There are areas in which, of course, there should be policy changes. I can say this, for example, with all honesty. If you look at the labor laws of this country, for example, they are quite stringent in terms of the management of the employees.
Yeah.
They are quite stringent. And in that regard, it becomes very, very difficult because even when you go for a bargaining meeting as an employer and employees always know that they have got a red card on you and they can deal with you at any given point in time, and there is nothing you are going to do, because the only thing you can do is to lock out or dismiss. Yeah. But whether you don't, it does not allow you to come up with other measures to pressurize the employees to go back to work. That is the other policy change. Of course, I'm aware that there are new labor legislations that are trying to deal with that, but the dispensation is not going to be that much different because it still extends a lot of benefits to the workers, unfortunately. Yeah. But I think that type of policy change you need. But now, at the same time, you also need the implementation of these projects, because it is the projects that generate jobs. It is the projects that increase the gross domestic product. And of course, it makes the economy feasible because you will have a proper infrastructure network.
Thank you very much for joining us. Insightful this morning, Dr. Rendani Moses Ralinala, who's a political analyst. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much.
Now, State of the Nation activities will end on the golf course this week at the annual Presidential Golf Challenge, hosted by the Ministry for Public Service and Administration in partnership with the State Information Technology Agency. The event will afford the President an opportunity to emphasize the role of business, economic development and growth, using education as a tool for sustainable development and economic growth. We are joined by the Deputy Minister for the Public Service and Administration, Ayanda Dlodlo, in Cape Town. Very good morning, ma'am. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much, and good morning to you.
Before we get into the pleasantries of the golf day and logistics, we have a lot of speculation about the health of the President this morning on Twitter. Our viewers are sending in questions. Can you give us an update? Is the President okay and in good health at the moment?
He looked sprightly to me yesterday. He was in top form. I don't know what would have happened between the last time that we saw him last night and this morning. But for all I care, he looked much better than he did a few weeks ago. So I'm quite confident that the President is quite fine.
Yeah, ma'am, there's just a lot of speculation on social media about the President having been off with exhaustion for a week or so. But let's move on to the golf day. You say that, this week the State of the Nation activities will end on the golf course. Just tell us more about the background of the day and the intention.
It dates back to 2001, having been started by President Mbeki and Minister Geraldine Moleketi. And it really was about having fun on the day after the State of the Nation address, but also raising funds that will go towards a charitable cause of whichever sitting president's prerogative was. So in this particular case, we hold it for President Jacob Zuma every year after the State of the Nation. You will remember that this year we've had 2 State of the Nation addresses. So in the last one, we did raise funding for his Jacob Zuma Education Trust, which has been in existence for many years when he was still the MEC for economic development in KZN. So we have decided this time around that it's going to be about really entertaining golfers who have been funding us before, but also creating an opportunity for government and business to interact and network. So it's not fundraising this time around.
I understand the event will afford a number of opportunities for interaction. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, we have, as you would know, men and women network on the whatever you call it, on the fairways, because I don't play golf. They network there. After the event, they would sit, still chat. There'll be opportunities for exchanging pleasantries, opportunities for talking about business ventures, opportunities for talking about a lot of things. So it's a networking session, really, which culminates into what would normally be the fundraising session. in aid of what the president would then put towards his education trust, which to date has put 4,015 children through tertiary education in the sciences, including medicine, and some at technical level in institutions of technology. At the end of it all, we then have a dinner where the president and some of the students then bear testimony to how this process has helped them in their lives. Sometimes you find parents wanting to bear testimony as to how it is that this has helped the families. So it's really a networking session, but also showcasing what it is that can be done by our president, what it is that can be done by the public and private sector to ensure that those that are the most needy get access to education, as was the case with our president, who we all know never had the opportunity to go to school, and he did want to go to school. He wants to afford that opportunity to every child that is unable to do that.
Ma'am, can you give us an idea of, who are some of the players that will be taking part in the event, and also logistic? Where does it take place, and where will the events then lead up to?
It's here in Cape Town at the Atlantic Golf Course. In the evening, we'll have a dinner at the ICC in Cape Town. And it's your normal sponsors. You will have Metropolitan, you will have MTN, you will have your big companies coming in, but you'll also have people that will come in and who have always donated the very little that they had. So they also become part of the players. So it's really a range of people from year to year that come in and want to participate.
Well, thank you very much for joining us this morning. That is the Deputy Minister for the Public Service and Administration here in South Africa, Ayanda Dlodlo, telling us about the Presidential Golf Day that will end off all the State of the Nation activities a little bit later this week. We hope that the weather stays very good in Cape Town for the next couple of days, ma'am. Thank you for joining us.
It should. Thank you.
Okay, let's now take a look at what's happening on the front pages around the world. Papers around the world can't help reporting on World Cup host Brazil's disappointing night against Mexico last night in Nigeria. In the latest, a suspected act of terrorism, at least 7 people are dead after a suicide bomber triggered an explosion while football fans were watching the World Cup match between Brazil and Mexico last night. Seems we're not the only country with energy problems. The City AM reporting on fears of a spike in energy prices. Time to reflect. During the period of transition and negotiation in South Africa, the core area of the conflict in the late 1980s was in KwaZulu-Natal, where battles between the Inkatha Freedom Party and the African National Congress raged. In 1990, the number of deaths outside Natal and KwaZulu rose from 124 to 1,888. Violence escalated into the early 1990s. One such violent incident was the Boipatong massacre that took place exactly 22 years ago this week.
Massacres and anti-government feeling rose to new heights. Mandela responded by announcing the end of all talks with the government.
I can no longer explain to our people why we continue to talk to a government, to a regime which is murdering our people.
We're remembering the Boipatong massacre happened this week 22 years ago, at a time that the answers for South Africa were not so simple. Let's now take a look at what you are talking about on social media. Of course, we are at SABC Newsroom on Twitter. That's where you can interact with us. Map says, Sona, each minister will sign a performance agreement with the president to ensure delivery. That's certainly something worth shouting about, says. Gareth Morgan says, good to hear we will have more medical students, but let's keep the qualified doctors in SA by providing good conditions of service, says Gareth after the Sona address. Is the president well, says Le Justo? Well, I asked the question and the deputy minister says the president is well. There are a lot of people worried about the health of President Zuma. Some say that he didn't look his sprightly self last night, but word is that he's in fine health. Lucanio says, I couldn't ignore the fact that Zuma appeared thin and frail. I really do pray for a speedy recovery. He's human after all. These are some of the concerns of our viewers. And Nkateko says, I agree with the cleaning campaign. Let's clean all the dirt, not just the streets. Sona. Those are some of your views. At SABC Newsroom, of course, is where you can send it to us. Now, before we go to a break, what would a State of the Nation address be without the glitz and glam of the red carpet? Here are some of the pictures from last night. There we have DA's Musi Mamani and his beautiful wife a little bit earlier, Chief Mandla Mandela and his wife. There were some Kwaito stars, the Deputy Minister of Agriculture, Mr. Beki Cele, Jackson Mthembu, and of course, DA leader Helen Zille was also there. These are some of the high fashion on the red carpet at the State of the Nation address in Cape Town last night. We're going to take a short commercial break. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News.
Why are protests violent? And why does it seem that the police are incapable of dealing with violent crowds?
The government of the day is failing the people, and it's leading to a lot of frustration. A person becomes a councillor or a minister, within a week, within 2 months, is riding a beautiful car. So all this is actually frustrating the people and giving
I
the
don't
wrong
you don't
message.
expect a councillor to ride a horse.
Not a horse, but maybe a Toyota Corolla.
That's Rights and Recourse, Sundays 2 p.m. on SABC News.
Who are we, you ask? This is who we are.
We are technologically driven.
We are unashamedly Afrocentric.
We advise you not only on legal matters,
but on health issues as well.
We bring imagination to life.
We celebrate arts and culture and lifestyle.
We tackle life challenges head on.
We dig deep. We probe. We question.
We invite you to take a view from our house, as we tell it without fear, separating fiction from factual.
We are the SABC News Channel.
All news, all global, all the time.
Welcome back. This is Newsroom. Of course, one of the main bugbears for the country's economy is the now 5-month-old strike in the country's mining sector. Much was expected from negotiations yesterday, but we report today that the strike is not over yet. Labour Union AMCU and South Africa's platinum producers have agreed on a broad wage offer, but details such as the time frame and additional benefits are still outstanding. AMCU wants, as part of the settlement, their members who were arrested for violence and intimidation to be released. The offer, that still has to be signed by all parties, would see the lowest paid workers get an increase of R1,000 a month. The 5-month strike has hit output at mines that normally account for 40% of global platinum supply and caused a humanitarian crisis along the platinum belt as miners' families struggled to survive. Mining analyst Mr. Peter Major joins us from Cape Town to talk about this. Very good morning to you, sir. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, Eben.
Last week, the striking miners gave the AMCU president a mandate to accept the offer in principle. It seems there's a lack of communication. How do you read this whole situation, sir?
Look, I think the miners made their intentions really clear. They really want to go back to work. They're very, very happy with what's been drawn up on the framework, and they just want to proceed as quick as possible. But Mr. Mutunjwa is quite an astute negotiator, and he's going to squeeze every little last drop out of this long strike. And he's trying to just extract more concessions from the mining companies. And they're obviously trying to extract the best deal they can because they're paying a lot more money than they can afford to. They all have billions in debt. and nobody knows how they're going to be able to pay even this increase.
Now, the strike all looks but resolved. It looks like by the end of this week, workers should be back at work, hopefully on Monday next week as we speak. But what has been the cost to the South African economy, mining companies, and we've seen the human cost that it's had?
Look, it's gigantic. The mining companies have lost about 22 billion rand. The workers have lost about 11 to 12 billion. And what's terrifying is this time last year, we were tallying up the mining industry had lost 21 billion in revenue from the previous 18 months. So we've now, in the last 2.5 years, we've lost around 44 billion rand for strikes that just seem to proliferate. So, and there's a multiplier effect. If that's the revenue that the mining company lost, and that's the revenue that the workers lost, there's the velocity of money. A worker spends money. He pays for food. And the shop that got his money then pays for other services. They pay the wholesaler. So you can multiply that figure by probably at least 4 or 5 times. So it's probably cost the economy well over 100 billion.
You touched on sustainability briefly a little bit earlier. I want to talk a little bit wider around that. Are we going to see many job losses after this strike resumes? And do you see this industry becoming less and less sustainable for international business?
Unfortunately, that's been the trend now for almost 20 years, Eben. Yes, our mining industry, especially the precious metal industry, which is diamonds, platinum, and gold, it's less and less attractive for foreign investors because it just shows massive losses or very low return on capital invested, whereas foreign investors, they can buy our cigarette companies, our alcohol companies, our gambling companies, and they can make a much better rate of return. So money always goes where it makes the best return. It's not sustainable the way we're going here. And what really is going to determine job losses, it's the metal price, which we can't control, and it's productivity that we can control, but we have not addressed productivity in 15 years. So the things we can control, we should be trying very hard to.
I wanted to ask you about the settlement that's being negotiated this week. It seems as if we might have one by the end of the week. But one of the things that AMCU wants as part of the settlement is that members who are arrested for violence and intimidation to be released. What do you make of that? It's not like they are an independent state who've been at war.
You're exactly right. We confuse too many political issues with constitutional issues, with business issues. And we're too used to labeling or to loading everything on top of the mining companies. The mining companies must fix the social infrastructure. The mining companies must grant everyone a house. The mining companies must make sure that men arrested for illegal violence and intimidation are released. And the fact is, I think more miners have been killed in strikes the last 3 years on the platinum mines than miners have been killed underground. And that's an insane statistic. And it's indicating how serious, how wrong things are in our mining industry and in our social fabric.
If you were in the office of the new Minister of Mineral Resources in South Africa from tomorrow, what would you be doing for the next month to get this ship back on track?
I've been asked this question before, and it's a heck of a load to put on just the mining minister, because we now have 34 ministries. We have the largest number of ministries on the planet. And it means each ministry can't really do too much on its own. But President Zuma did say he's appointing Minister Radabi head of an interministerial committee, which is about 7 of our large ministries, to start looking into how can we fix our broken mining industry. And that's a good start. And President Zuma said he's now going to take over the framework agreement that our vice president put together a year ago. So our mining minister is going to need these other ministers to help. But if our mining minister went to the public, media, like we saw in Mongolia about a month ago, and they admitted to the mining companies and to the world that they have added way too much burdensome legislation, that they've been way too punitive against the mining companies, that they've demonized them way more than they ever should have been. And they've asked for an apology, and they want to retract a lot of that. Now, it's hard to believe we would ever have such a retraction here, but that's what it's going to take if we want to stop this downward trend in our precious metal industry. That's our livelihood, our lifeblood.
Thank you very much for joining us this morning. That's mining analyst Peter Major joining us live from Cape Town. Talking about the situation on the mines, sustainability and the like. What are you talking about? What are you passionate about? What do you want to say? At SABC Newsroom, that's where we live. Let's have a look at some of your comments. What are we talking about? It's World Cup, of course. Edson Machia says Brazil will not win the World Cup 2014. He says, I agree with you, especially not after last night. What a performance by Mexico. The goalkeeper, I suppose, Ochoa, last night. I wonder if the Stegen and Bravo are at that level beyond Barca stuff. He says, obviously, at Barcelona. Disher says, Ochoa was just brilliant. Hard luck, Brazil. Respect Mexico. FIFA World Cup 2014. Yes, Brazil now have to beat. There we have a picture, I think, from last night in the stadium. This picture, wow, look at that bit of gees. Was sightseeing Mineiro, Belo Horizonte. That's where the match took place. Of course, there are Dani Alves and Neymar Jr., two of the protagonists in the Brazilian team. Really, they'd be hoping to win the World Cup. Of course, fan parks all over Brazil where people can take in the World Cup at their leisure. Where wonderful atmosphere in that country. Let's take a look at what's happening on our Facebook page now. Read more about the explosion that ripped through a venue in the town of Damaturu in Nigeria, where fans gathered to watch a World Cup match last night. Also there, a suspected rhino poacher has been killed by Kruger National Park rangers in the north of the park. And of course, you can read more on what President Jacob Zuma focused on in his State of the Nation address last night. Now time for our YouTube clip of the day, a video called GoPro. Man fights off great white shark in Sydney Harbour. It's gone viral. It's been viewed more than 18 million times and has inspired more than 13,000 comments. But some say it's fake. Take a look at it for yourself and let us know at SABC Newsroom, what do you think? If it was me, I'd be walking on the water. That's why I think that video is not real. But that's only my opinion. At SABC Newsroom, that's where we want you to tell us, what do you think? This is Newsroom. We'll be back after a short break.
South Africans survived 2014.
Many of us actually were given bursaries by state-owned enterprises, but the state shrunk, telecom was privatized, and now you are sitting with huge unemployed people, but huge backlogs in terms of infrastructure that could develop the same young people.
It's in our hands, and our future is up to us. It's a tough year, and tough decisions will have to be made by the government. It's an election year, which makes it difficult to make tough decisions. I mean, it's tough to make tough decisions. It's especially tough in an election year.
That's Rights and Recourse, Sundays 2 p.m. on SABC News.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News. Let's have a look at the news-making headlines this morning. There's been mixed reaction to President Jacob Zuma's State of the Nation address delivered last night in Parliament. Zuma announced ambitious plans to take control of the turmoil in the mining sector and to ease the country's energy supply. The president has vowed to follow up on the implementation of his program of action. Unveiling the government's plan for the next 5 years, Zuma said it will be focused on making the economy grow. There's still hope for an end to the platinum strike after union AMCU submitted a written response to the latest offer from mining firms Implats, Amplats and Lonmin. The companies won't divulge on the contents of AMCU's response, saying they're still studying it. Although the response has not been made public, it is widely believed AMCU wants the companies to agree to a moratorium on the retrenchments before they sign any deal. Then power outages have got Johannesburg residents fuming. Soweto residents went on a rampage yesterday after being without electricity for days. A protest of at least 100 people began on Monday when residents blockaded roads in the area with rocks and burning tyres. But Eskom maintains it's not load shedding, despite several other suburbs and businesses being plunged into darkness. Teams led by KwaZulu-Natal MECs for local government and agriculture have provided aid to victims in fire-ravaged areas near Kokstad. At least 10 people have died in veld fires which swept through the Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal. Large numbers of livestock have perished and large tracts of grazing land destroyed. At least 200 families have been left homeless. Then World Cup favourites Brazil were held to a goalless draw by Mexico in an absorbing Group A match. Brazil failed time and again to break down a stubborn Mexican defence. Both teams now need points from their final group games on Monday when Brazil face Cameroon and Mexico meet Croatia if they want to make the second round of the tournament. Then in the other game last night, Belgium secured a 2-1 comeback victory over Algeria, the only African team to win in their first World Cup match in Brazil's Côte d'Ivoire. Now, 2 HIV-positive foreign prisoners have challenged the Botswana's government's decision to deny ARV treatment to foreign prisoners living with HIV as unlawful and unconstitutional. In particular, they argue that it denies the prisoners the right to live, it's discriminating and equality. Legal analysts have also condemned the Botswana government on this decision. The Southern African Litigation Centre says it will make sure that the prisoners get the treatment. Botswana High Court has reserved judgment on the matter. Today we are joined by Priti Patel, the Deputy Director of South African Litigation Centre, who joins us today in studio. Priti, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Let's just start off with your stand on this whole situation.
Sure. So we argue that the Botswana government's policy of denying ARV treatment to foreign prisoners is illegal, and it's also that it's irrational. And so what we mean by that is that there's a few reasons why it's irrational, right? So the first is that we know scientifically that people living with HIV, if they are on treatment and the treatment is working, then they're actually less infectious. They're less likely to pass on the illness to other people. So that is one of the reasons we would say that this policy is irrational in terms of the Botswana government's desire to lower HIV within prisons. But the other reason is that people living with HIV who aren't on treatment are also more susceptible to infectious illnesses like tuberculosis. And we already know that prisons are already amazing venues for tuberculosis spreading, right? Because they're closed, people are in close quarters. And so you have people living with HIV who aren't on treatment who are constantly getting tuberculosis like our clients, and they're passing it on to other prisoners. And the third reason is that the Botswana government currently is actually giving treatment to foreign prisoners for other illnesses, not HIV related. But people living with HIV not on treatment are susceptible to these other illnesses. So it actually costs them more money to treat these what we call opportunistic infections than it would to actually just pay for the HIV treatment in the first place.
Any indication of how many foreign prisoners are living with HIV?
We actually have no idea. And one of the most interesting things about this case is that the Botswana government is arguing that we don't have enough money, but they're not actually providing any information about how many people they would have to treat, how much money that would cost, and so as far as we know, it could be as little as 10,000 pula, which is the Botswana currency, a month, or it could be a lot larger, but we have no information about that. And one wonders if the Botswana government itself has the information.
What do you expect the outcome of this case?
So it's hard to know, and one never wants to read the tea leaves of a court, right? But I will say that the judge was incredibly interested in the matter. He questioned the government attorneys very, very strongly, and so what we're hoping is that he will see that foreign prisoners living with HIV in Botswana prisons do deserve HIV treatment, not only for their own benefit, but for the benefit of other prisoners in prison and for the government itself.
Now, the Botswana government argues that it is under no legal obligation to provide HIV treatment for these prisoners. What's your stance on that?
So we, I think, very strongly argue that it's illegal, and I think for a number of reasons. I mean, one, which you mentioned at the outset, is that under Botswana's constitution, it guarantees the right to life. And I think one of the things that we know is that if you do not get treatment and you are living with HIV, you will die. I mean, the second is that it guarantees the right to be free from inhuman and degrading treatment. And I think one of the things that we're arguing is that not having just life-saving treatment, like basic health treatment, actually is degrading. It puts these prisoners in a position that is humiliating to them. And the third is that it protects the right to be free from discrimination. So you can't be discriminated just because you happen to be a foreigner, especially when you're in a situation where you're in prison. So you have no opportunities to earn money. You have no way of accessing funds to buy yourself treatment. And then the last thing that we argue is that it's also illegal under Botswana's other laws, including, for example, their Prisons Act.
Now, the government is also arguing that their number one priority are their nationals and that they don't have enough medication. What is the deal there?
Yeah, so I think there's a few arguments there that we put forward to the court. I mean, one is just that they didn't provide any evidence of how many people they would have to provide treatment for. So again, it could just be 5 to 10 people within the entire nation, and then there's no real argument. The second, as I said earlier, is that it's costing them more money at the moment to treat opportunistic infections. So I'm not sure why it would make sense to spend X amount of money treating opportunistic infections, but not less than X to treat the HIV infection. And then the third is again, something that I've already said, but these are people in prison. So and they're foreigners, right? So they have no ability to earn money outside of and work. But secondly, they're foreigners, so most likely their families, like our clients, their families live somewhere else. So to be able to get money is also hard for them. So and they've been put in prison by the Botswana government legitimately, but they have no other way of accessing treatment. And again, this is life-saving treatment. We're not talking about something that makes you feel better at the end of the day. This is something that saves your life.
Then just to recap, to end off this interview, just recap when we can be expecting the outcome of this case.
So we're hoping that the High Court will make a decision within the next 2 months, and that what we expect is that the Botswana government would actually appeal the decision if it's not in their favor to the highest court in the country.
Well, Priti, thank you so much for joining us. And that was Priti Patel from the, let me just get this right, Southern African Litigation Centre. This after 2 HIV-positive foreign prisoners have challenged the Botswana government's decision to deny ARV treatment for foreign prisoners. Eben, back to you.
Thanks, Katrine. Finally, the Department of Education in Gauteng is looking at a way of merging township and city schools within the province to create what it calls a non-racial learning environment. Education MEC Panyaza Lesufi says this would lead to social cohesion amongst pupils who are still separated by certain boundaries. This proposal and the department's suggestion that joint schools would have the same governing body and principle has come under fire. And joining us now in Bloemfontein to give us their position is Dr. Jacob Zuma, who's the Deputy CEO of the Federation of Governing Bodies of South African Schools. Good morning to you. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Morning, Eben. Thank you.
This idea from the Department of Education is still to be tested. Do you think it'll work?
Well, I think the point of departure is the obligation in terms of the Constitution to provide basic education. So it's very ambitious for the MEC to start to focus on the merger and possible closure of schools, whilst the province still struggle to provide the basics in terms of the Constitution. So it may sound like a good idea, but in practical terms, there's a few legal possible hurdles that you will face in the process.
And what are then some of the logistical challenges that this merger would face that you were alluding to?
I think the first important thing is to understand that we don't have any state schools in South Africa. We've got public schools. And the public school belongs to a very specific school community. And the aim is, and idea is that the school community should take responsibility for that school. So the moment that you merge a school, it's a statutory process that the MEC must follow, a consultation process in the different communities, and then obviously the practical problems. If you've got a fee school on the one side and a no-fee school on the other side, who will be your school principal, and the practical implications thereof. So we would rather suggest that the MEC focus on providing quality education in the province, number one, and number two, assist schools to form partnerships for social cohesion, where schools can work together in different communities to interact in cultural activities and sport activities instead of simply merging the schools.
Would that be enough then? How do you overcome the historical context of our country, and how do we then achieve a non-racial learning environment in South Africa?
Eben, I think that's a very important question. We talk about the former Model C schools, and those schools were never more than 7% out of the total number of schools in the country. So, I can honestly say, and with confidence say, I think those schools are the most transformed schools currently in the system. Between 10 to 15% of our schools are really transformed into high-performing schools with cultural and language diversity. And I think by merging schools, you're not going to overcome the problem. We've got dysfunctional schools that are not transformed at all, that will make out between 90 and 85% of the number of schools. And the MEC should rather focus on that and provide quality education than merging the functional schools and dysfunctional schools.
Why do you think the department is putting the focus on race then? It seems then that there must be an issue with race within the education system.
The problem in Gauteng is the provision of quality education to all the learners. And by asking schools to merge, they're not addressing the problem. There's a huge influx of learners from other provinces to Gauteng, as well as learners from other African countries to Gauteng. So the MEC should rather focus his attention to build new schools and to make sure that they provide the education. There's a huge number of dysfunctional schools in Gauteng. And if I were the MEC, I would spend my time and energy to fix those schools first. And also encourage the schools to form partnerships instead of quick fix or think there's a quick fix like a merger. It's not going to work.
In South Africa, schools carry lots of prestige. Parents pay large sums of money to get their children into these prestigious schools. Do you think there's a threat to this? And would this be a point why people will be fighting against this?
It is definitely a possibility that there's a perception that if I take my learners from a previous disadvantaged or a dysfunctional school to a school in the suburbs or a former Model C school, that my children will do it in future. And I think as a parent, obviously, you would like the best for your children. But 7% of the schools cannot cater for 100% of the learners. And that's why this cannot be a quick fix.
Yeah.
The emphasis should be on quality education for all the learners, regardless where you stay. Parents shouldn't be forced to take their learners from a specific community and take them to another school just to get quality education. And that's the question.
A key question. It's also a priority for the next 20 to 30 years in South Africa is education, and we have to find the answers to all these questions. Dr. Jacob Deacon, thank you for joining us this morning. Dr. Deacon is, Deputy CEO of the Federation of Governing Bodies of South African Schools, and we were talking there about a way of merging township and city schools and whether that is viable and whether, it would be able to create a non-racial learning environment here in South Africa. It is a key question. Let's take a final look at what you are still talking about, twittering along on social media. And Togozo, Ntokozo Kumalo says, when Soweto starts to protest, something is wrong gravely with the system, she says. Soweto tours ZZ. Soweto last night resembled Christmas neon lights during load shedding. On here, off there. A little bit of humor there after, well, people are up in arms about the power outages. Max says, I would like to thank Eskom SA for allowing me to get in a training session and hair done before cutting my power. How so thoughtful, she says. Of course, that's the sarcasm just drips off it. Cha-Cha says, Eskom doesn't want to reveal that there are township entrepreneurs who are doing good business in selling illegal electricity to homes, says Cha-Cha. And then Gaynor Cast says, finally, 5 hours later, the lights are on again. Of course, Eskom let it be known well in advance yesterday that over the next 2 months, there'll be phase 1 load shedding. That means in your area, probably every third or fourth day, they'll switch the power off for 4 hours, probably during peak time. And if you're up in arms about that, you are not alone. There are many people around South Africa who are not happy with it. It's in the middle of winter. Some people are blockading roads and protesting in parts of the country. But that's where we leave it today. I hope you're warm wherever you are and that the lights are on. Newsroom is broadcast live from our studios in Auckland Park in Johannesburg between 9 and 10 a.m. every weekday morning. The show repeats at 2 in the afternoon with a rebroadcast at 5 a.m. the following morning. We also stream live on YouTube between 9 and 10 with our whole show available on demand on our YouTube channel. This is SABC News. You've been watching Newsroom. We love it in the morning.